you can't use a restorative justice in an intimate partner relationship, which obviously makes up the majority of our domestics. But in relation to that outcome, that is fairly consistent and stable at the moment. Obviously, it's something that we'd like to see increase, and just to draw your attention to the fact we talk about the domestic abuse team. That's a relatively not new since last PAB, but it was really new last PAB. Now it's been established. And what we are seeking to do at the moment is doing a lot of work, sharing the learning from our domestic abuse teams to skill our frontline staff in relation to evidence capture. And you will have noticed, sir, that all staff in South Yorkshire, I'm sure you'll have heard this at other performance reports, are doing what we call DA Matters training at the moment, which really is to raise awareness of the impact on victims of domestic abuse, but also some of the more hidden offending, such as coercion and control. And part of that is hoping to improve the investigation and the quality of investigation that our frontline officers and specialists are doing to identify those other avenues for looking at positive action.
Yeah, we have heard quite a lot about domestic abuse matters, and it does seem to be a very powerful training opportunity there. Has a great impact on people. Thank you. Can I take you to 413? And that's MATAC, it's multi-agency tasking and coordinating initiative. I just wonder if you could say that's around perpetrators of domestic abuse. I wonder if you could say something about that. I mean, has it actually begun? Is it happening?
It's in its implementation phase. It is being implemented across the force, and I think this is specifically around MATAC, which, as you say, sir, is about targeting offenders around domestic abuse. But prior to that, each of the areas has had a structure in place through our integrated offender managers to look at domestic abuse offending, and also within our what we call our Thrive processes, which is our tasking processes that operate looking at threat, harm and risk every 2 weeks to look at targeting offenders. But what MATAC does, and it's been used elsewhere in the country, most well known in Northumbria, is rather than doing what MARAC does, which is focus on the victim in a domestic situation, it focuses on tackling the behaviour of the offender, which, as you can imagine, is really beneficial, because it may be that offenders are offending in their history against more than one victim, and it really is the behaviour. We would much rather stop the offenders offending to safeguard the victim, rather than having to put a wrap around the victim. That's a more effective way of tackling it.
Thank you. On page 18, this is you've got two graphs there: child protection, non-crimes; adult protection, non-crimes. I noticed that the child protection graph, that seems to be relatively steady picture, but the adults protection non-crime, that seems to be going up. And I wonder if you could say something. It looks like a trend upwards. Would that be the case? And is that telling us that about more work that's being done, or what exactly?
I think in relation to the adult protection, the report reflects the concerns that I think all services and partnerships have in relation to the increased vulnerability of people during the COVID pandemic. For a number of reasons, people being isolated and the impact that has on people's emotional and mental health, the fact that the access to services is more limited, so people are not seeing, for example, their GPs, they're not seeing the pharmacist, etc., etc. So I'm not saying services have disappeared, but they may have changed, or there's less access to personal contact, which has a positive impact on people's emotional and mental health. And we have seen increases in relation to our 136 referrals, which relate to police intervention around mental health, where it's deemed appropriate somebody to be detained to address that. But also we have seen increases in referrals around adult protection, which tends to suggest that these relate to lower level vulnerability than somebody who's having a mental health episode. So it really does look at the vulnerability of adults, and this would tend to suggest that during the pandemic that vulnerability has increased. And as you say, what happens with these referrals is they go into our local referral unit, and they then link in with adult social care and adult services to seek to provide some additional support, whatever that bespoke support is, within that adult protection environment.
Thank you very much. You mentioned section 136, and that takes me to page 19, where you reference that again down there. You talk about the timeliness of the interventions here. That does seem to be very good, so 90% within a 2-hour period. I just wonder, again, if you could just briefly comment around that.
Just in relation to mental health in general, we've done a lot of work with partner agencies from ourselves, the ambulance service, ORDASH, local authority and adult social care in relation to addressing some of the challenges around mental health and the capacity within the mental health environment to support individuals. So we have done some work around increasing the efficiency of some of the assessments that take place in relation to the 136. But we've also done a lot of work in relation to the SIM program, or the Serenity Integrated Mentoring program, which relates to supporting individuals in communities who have got emotional or mental health needs, where they really do need bespoke support. And this really has those partnerships working together to ensure that that support is what they need, and that's really targeted, intensive work with a small number of individuals. But like you say, we have seen some, through this partnership and escalation structure, we have seen some improved efficiencies in relation to the timeliness of assessments.
It seems, looking in from the outside, so to speak, it looks as if this approach is now well embedded in Doncaster.
It is well embedded. I mean, there are still challenges in relation to capacity of services around mental health, but what this allows is for us to have those points of contact to be able to escalate cases where further support is needed.
Thank you. Moving on to tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, that's the same, well, it's on page 20. Looking in on Doncaster, your figures here for incident demand, there doesn't seem to have been a falling away during the coronavirus lockdown period, which I think we've noticed in other districts. Is that true? Is Doncaster a bit different in that respect?
You'll see from the chart, we saw some slight reductions during the early part of the year, but you'll see, like you say, it was relatively stable between January and April, and then we've seen some increases towards the end of the year in relation to reporting. Some of those increases will be the added demand that comes from COVID breaches, which we've seen quite significantly and is subject to report later in the report. But as you say, we don't seem to have seen the significant reductions. So when we come on to crime a little bit later in the report, you will see that those reductions are reflected in some of our crime reporting. But it has been relatively stable in relation to incident demand.
Yeah, it was about demand and the impact on your officers, which must be quite considerable.
The demand or COVID?
Well, taken together, the fact that we have this coronavirus must be impacting on the force, and here your demand is not falling away, or seemingly not falling away.
No, we do have quite a robust structure in force to consider our resourcing on a daily and weekly basis, to consider where or if there are any lulls in or gaps in our structures that might influence the way in which we deliver a service. and I myself and Mr. Hartley is also one who runs the gold for our COVID response. I myself can say that I'm really proud of my officers and the organisation as a whole as to how this has been managed, because what we have managed to maintain throughout the whole of the COVID pandemic, even though we have seen abstractions and absences, each other to ensure that we continue to deliver the service to the public. And I'm also proud of my officers who are not often recognised within the wider media, but actually going out and putting themselves at risk every day. And like I say, I'm just proud that we've continued to deliver that service.
Right, thank you very much. I'm on to page 22, and this is paragraphs 5, 10 onwards. You talk about neighbourhood teams, and they're becoming increasingly multi-agency teams with Doncaster, Metropolitan Borough Council. And I wondered if you could say something around that. Is this something that's being rolled out across the whole district? Is it? How's that going?
This is something that is being rolled out across the whole district. It is the aim of this is to actually have co-located structures and teams that will bring together our neighbourhood teams, local authority, housing, and anybody else who needs to be in that team. The likelihood is you will have a core multi-agency team with then some wider access, sort of virtual links to wider teams that are brought in when they need be. The structures are in place in relation to the locality model, in relation to bringing the meeting structures together and bringing people together virtually to support those delivery within communities. But I think it's fair to say, and as you can imagine during the COVID pandemic, some of the co-location ambition has not yet been achieved. You will see from the report that this was piloted in the Edlington area, and we saw some really positive aspects in relation to that. And this is really about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. And I talked about Mexborough earlier, about some of the work that needs to be done to build the resilience of communities and to engage with young people in those communities to look towards the future so that the community as a whole has a better outcome.
Yes, I mean, the figures you've given for Edlington are very good. 22% decrease in police incidents, 44% reduction in reported antisocial behaviour, 40% reduction in recorded crime in the area. And you'd attribute that very much to these multi-agency teams then?
I think it would be naive to say it's all due to those locality teams. But I think what the locality team does is it brings a focus not only by this specific team itself, but also the links into the broader mechanisms of those partnerships who can then are aware of that focus and then bring that additionality. And some of this is also about the buy-in of the community themselves in relation to tackling some of the issues within their own community.
Thank you. Let me take you on to Hexham, page 23. You referenced there some funding that we've been able to secure through the OPCC from the government for work in the Hexthorpe area. That looks as if this is the Safer Streets Fund, two lots of that now, I think 500,000 and 100,000 I think it was. And you think that really does make a difference? CCTV cameras, ANPR cameras and so on.
I think it does make a difference. And some of this comes back to the idea of the sort of the broken windows philosophy, which really sees that when you invest in a community, you build a pride within that community to look after themselves as well as the partnership and the police looking after them. There is still work to do in the Hexthorpe area, and some of the spending for this is still ongoing. I'm advised, because obviously I chair the Community Safety Partnership, I'm advised that those things will be in place by the end of the year. And I do think that these things, firstly, obviously do assist in deterring people from committing crime, but also assist us in investigating crime, and also build the confidence of that community that actually those things have been taken seriously.
Yes, something I have appreciated in your paragraph 520 is that where you've got these characters growing cannabis and bypassing the electricity meter and getting the electricity direct from the grid, they're creating power cuts in the area. And I don't know how often this happens, but I wonder whether there was any way in which the power companies themselves can help you with intelligence about where leakages of this kind are happening.
Yeah, we are working closely with the power companies. As you describe, they do hold information in relation to power usage, and we are currently working with the power companies to get that two-way relationship established. In fact, it is already established, and we are working with them to identify these issues and also to identify specific cannabis cultivations, and we've had quite some success, as can be seen there, in relation to those. But we are concerned of the impact that the power cuts have on the community. Please don't ask me to explain the technical bits about why it ends up in a power cut, but I think it's something to do with power surges, and then the system shuts it off to protect the power supply. But we are concerned about that, and we do get a number of letters from local councillors and members of the public in relation to concerns about those power cuts. So as you say, we are working closely with the power companies to firstly try and utilise information and intelligence to address the issues, but also to minimise the impact of those power cuts on the community, especially at this time of year.
Sorry, Mel, it's Mark, the Deputy. Make a couple of points on the Cannabis Cultivations Commissioner.
Yes, of course.
Just in addition to the issues about the power supply, I think sometimes people think that cannabis is at the lower end of harm that it causes community. Well, I think increasingly medical evidence points to the issues around psychosis, but it's also the criminal activity that it drives. And what we see an awful lot of is criminal gangs will locate someone else's grow of cannabis and launch an attack on the premises, often incredibly violent with weapons, to try and harvest the crop before the original growers do it. So one, it's a driver for that sort of really violent activity, and two, because of the setups, and it's been mentioned about the high use of electricity, they often lead to fires in domestic properties. Now, a lot of these things are situated in private rented accommodation in residential areas. So we really would encourage people, if there is any suspicion about premises near you that is being used for cannabis cultivation, please don't turn a blind eye. You can contact us anonymously, but you are at risk if you're near one of these. The criminals often get the wrong address. So we've seen numerous incidents where decent families are settled in at home and the house has been invaded by criminals looking for a cannabis cultivation, and they've got the wrong address. And equally, as I say, the issue of house fires. So it really is one, if people suspect there's one of these in your area, please don't turn a blind eye to it, because the presence of it does place yourselves at risk as well. So it is one where we need the community to work with us and give us the tip-offs about where these growths are taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have been in houses where there has been cannabis growing, and down in the cellar with all the wires and the way they try to bypass the electricity meter. I mean, it's just terrifying when you actually see the botched work that they do to engineer these things. And thank you for that. Can I move you on, Mel, to page 24? The heading is speeding. This is something, as you know, which has gone up the list of concerns for me, because more and more, again, as you know, I've been to meetings of local parish councils and town councils where in the past we might have been talking about crime, we might have been talking about antisocial behaviour of different sorts, but speeding has been the issue, and very quickly it's been an issue, not so much of speeding in itself, but the whole question of road safety. Just to alert you to say, I think this is something that is concerning those communities more and more, and something we are going to have to do more around. And I've been talking to the Safety Camera Partnership, and I know they're about to launch a 10-year strategy around improving road safety, and I'm sure the police will be heavily involved in that, but it is something just to notice that it has gone up, their concerns around that. Thank you. Can I take to page 26, and commercial burglary. You talk about a downward trend in commercial burglary. I do get people write to me from time to time about non-residential burglaries, and you talk about a downward trend, and of course you can't argue with these figures. Is this a national phenomenon, or is this, do we know anything about this? Is it to do with lockdown, or?
We anticipated when we went into lockdown, obviously, especially in the first part of the year, and you'll see on that chart a slight increase in March and then a downward trend. We expected, with people being on furlough, now I know the current lockdown isn't anything like the first lockdown, but we did have an expectation that commercial burglary would see an increase, and at Doncaster we've not seen that increase. But I think there were some plans put in place early in lockdown to provide some target hardening and some support around locations that were particularly vulnerable. But we are surprised to see that decrease. I know, having come from Sheffield, that we again didn't see the expected increase at Sheffield. But I have to apologise, sir, and I'll take it away and have a look at it. But I'm not sure what the national trend looks like in relation to commercial burglary, but I can have a look at it and come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, don't apologise. There's no reason why you should know that, unless by chance you did. But it just seemed curious, because as you say, you might expect that with empty premises, there might be more break-ins, but seemingly not. On to page 28, more serious violence. Again, it seems to have increased when we came out of the first lockdown, and I just wonder, therefore, as we now come out of another lockdown, what your expectations are around that, what you anticipate might happen.
I think in relation to more serious violence, we have seen, you'll see particular reductions in the first lockdown, and then, as you say, an increase during, we do often see an increase in the summer in relation to more serious violence. As human beings, we don't deal with the heat very well, shall we say. But we are looking at a partnership we have a renewal board which looks at recovery from COVID. And we do have concerns that when the nighttime economy opens up again, that we will see a sudden flux in relation to that, where people who haven't been able to go out for some time suddenly all rush to go out at the same time, and people possibly drinking in excess of what they would have normally, which might lead to an increase in more serious violence. So we are looking at that. As part of the violence reduction group under the Community Safety Partnership, we are looking at what a return to a nighttime economy might look like, and having a partnership approach with a view to ensuring that this doesn't lead to a significant increase in more serious violence.
Okay, thank you very much. On to treating people fair. This is on page 29. I'm just interested in the independent advisory groups, the IAGs, and what's been happening to them over the past 12 months or so during this period of restrictions and lockdown. And are they meeting, and how are they meeting, and who's involved? Do you have any information around that?
I do, yes. So we sought to take that independent advisory group to provide some support, reassurance, and early indications of whether there were any challenges around that. And obviously we have Brexit on the horizon as well. To weekly, we're currently reviewing that, because what we've actually seen as a result of taking it weekly is actually a reduced attendance, even though it's online. So we're looking to take that bi-weekly now to see if we can increase the attendance. I think some of the challenges is virtually it's easier for some people, but also people have got other things that are happening in their lives which may have drawn people away from being involved in such groups. We have got quite a good spread in relation to the meeting and attendance setup. So we've got asylum seekers charity, some representatives from the deaf community, LGBT plus, Chinese community, a youth worker, representatives from various communities in the neighbourhoods, Roma Slovak representation. So we just need to get, it is still up and running, and like I said, we're just amending taking it from weekly to bi-weekly to try and improve the attendance at that.
Do you have much of a VAME? You mentioned asylum seekers, but do you have much of a VAME presence?
I'm advised we do have, it says on here Asian representation, but I think we just need to understand what that looks like in relation to the VMAE community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think that's all the questions I've got, Mel, and I wonder whether there was anything that you wanted to draw our attention to that hasn't come up. I mean, you may be quite happy with that.
The only thing that would draw your attention to, sir, is the fact that we have seen quite a reduction in a number of our crime business.
Yeah.
So sorry, got distracted by some background noise. But also we are looking to. We've currently got 6 sergeants and 45 PCs within our neighbourhood structures. We are looking at an uplift at the end of this month to 9 and 52. We have got some vacancies and we have got some recruitment plans to ensure that those vacancies are filled probably over the coming year. To make sure that we have that distribution across our neighbourhood teams. We're absolutely committed to delivering the neighbourhood structure.
Those figures that you just quoted, if you could send me a copy of those in an email, that would be very useful for meetings that I go to where people always ask that question about how many officers have we got. So thank you.
I will do so.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't know if anybody else has any comments they want to make on that report. If not, thank you to Doncaster. Shall we move then to... Well, we're going to move to item 12 on the agenda because I gather that Sherry Buttle, Superintendent Sherry Buttle, who is, I think, introducing item 12, wants to get away. So, stalking protection orders, this is pages 51 to 56. Are you actually there?
Yes, good morning.
Then whether you can reveal yourself or...
Yeah, I've put my camera on for you. Can you see me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to say a word about these stalking protection orders? Because they're relatively new, and just give us some idea of how they work, what they are, how they work, whether they're working, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just touch on the highlights from the reports then. So stalking protection orders have been in place now for 12 months. And I think initially there was a mistaken belief that they would be very similar to domestic violence protection notices or domestic violence protection orders. And that there would be some similarities to that legislation. However, there are significant differences in that domestic violence protection notices. We only have to have a reasonable belief that violence has been committed. However, with stalking protection orders, we need to ensure that we have enough evidence to prosecute an offender as well. So that's the first issue in terms of stalking protection orders. But we have seen some successes at force. We've managed to get 2 orders to date, and we have another 6 currently being reviewed by our legal team. We've rolled out training across all frontline officers through the street skills training to ensure that staff have a good awareness and knowledge of what stalking protections are. But however, that being said, our priority for me has to be to continue to accurately record stalking offences and bring offenders to justice through the criminal justice process. So whilst stalking protection orders do offer as an additional tool to safeguard victims, our priority has to be, for me, in the first instance, to try and collate evidence and bring offenders to justice through the criminal justice process. And quite often, that can mean that the necessity or the appropriateness of a stalking protection order is negated then, because we can implement other measures such as bail conditions whilst an offender is on bail and we're pursuing that prosecution. But also we can then apply for restraining orders should an offender be convicted at court of a stalking or harassment offence. So I think there's some positives today in terms of their implementation, our understanding of the legislation, working with legal services, and also sharing best practice with other forces in the region and nationally in terms of stalking protection orders. And we continue to see good buy-in from the officers who are engaging with legal services and getting advice, and legal services are continuing to triage cases on a daily basis to see whether they are appropriate for stalking protection orders. I think there's still a lot of learning to take place in relation to them. I know that nationally there's now an evaluation underway, and once that evaluation has been completed, I think we'll understand a lot more about stalking protection orders and the value that they can bring to victims.
Yeah, thank you. In 4.6, you mentioned the first order that you had, and it was being appealed, and
Yes.
we heard in end of January. What happened?
So the stalking protection order was appealed. It was varied slightly, but it remains in place, which is obviously a success story for us as well. And it's quite a significant case in that the victim, sadly, has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. So it was really important for me to ensure that that stalking protection order remains in place and she continues to get that protection, obviously, in the current circumstances she finds herself in, sadly.
Yes, thank you. Well, obviously they're very new, and perhaps at some point in the future we might have you back or someone back to tell us how it's been going since then. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Unless anybody's got any comment on that, shall we move on to the next slide, which is, we're going back to item 11. Against the police and crime plan, protecting vulnerable people. Dan, I can see you there. Are you?
Morning, Commissioner. Can you hear me?
I can now, yes. I'm not sure whether my signal went off by what happened there.
Yeah, there's a bit of interference, I think.
Is this you taking this forward? Or?
Yes, I'm here to represent that.
So if we look at this is the Protecting Vulnerable People report team. If you could just say something around this, how that's been working during this period of restriction and lockdown, because it seems like some very positive results here.
Yes, absolutely. The Domestic Violence Protection team have been working really well even during the pandemic, and they've been applying for orders by the DVPNs online with the courts. We've seen some really good results in relation to that. Our conversion rate is really high. It's around 80% from a superintendent authorising a domestic violence protection notice that then gets translated into or transferred into an order of court. So that's a really high percentage. And when you compare our success or comparison with other forces, we're by far using the domestic violence protection notices in a large proportion of cases.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we're probably the most proactive force in the country in terms of the use of them, which together with the proactivity around domestic abuse that we talked about earlier with the number of arrests, etc. I think pre-COVID we were arresting an extra 400 people a month, a lot of whom were responsible for domestic abuse, then it is a real area of focus for us. And one, as Dan says, where the DVPO team are extremely proactive, and not only is the quantity, but it's quality as well, as alluded to on the stats, because we get a lot of them agreed, and they're a really good tool to give victims some space and hopefully keep them safe.
Thank you. Yes. And so during this lockdown period, then, Dan, that's worked well. So these are remote hearings.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The remote hearings done, majority of them are online. I mean, it's a success. I mean, we're getting an average of using them DVPOs at an average of about 50 per month. But that can vary, as you can imagine. But that's the average rate. And like I said, we're transferring DVPNs into DVPOs 80% of the time. The conversion rate for January, most recent complete month, was 84%. So, we've done a lot of work around training our officers and those that authorise DVPNs around what to look for, the say evidential aspects that go into them, which is then translated, as you can see, into the successes at court.
No, that looks really good. I'm on page 38 now, and that's 3.19. These partnership-based profiles. This is rape and serious sexual assault cases. This seems really good. That the work that's been done there, very detailed profiles that you've been able to build up. I just wonder whether that is a technique that's used in other crime types.
Yes, we provide profiles, partnership-based profiles. I mean, there's a partnership analyst in all local authorities now, and they link very much with our teams in the police. And we provide partnership-based profiles not only for these type of offences, but for others as well. And they do, I mean, not suitable necessarily to disclose at this meeting, but they did go into quite some depth to allow ourselves and partners to tackle some of these crimes. So, for example, in this case with serious sexual offences, we know that in a majority of our districts, a lot of those offences are evidence in the nighttime economy, and it provides some data and sort of hotspot locations in relation to those. So we review those on quite a regular basis to help inform how we tackle those crimes.
Thank you. Can I ask you on 321, you talk about the communications campaign, and of course there are lots of communication campaigns of one sort or another. I just wondered how effective you thought these were. Do we have any means of knowing how effective a lot of these campaigns are, or do we just launch into them?
We do try and take note about how effective they are. I mean, that's replicated by increasing reporting normally. So, for example, as you know, we've done a number of media campaigns, including reporting, allowing victims to report online to us, certainly, which is really important during the lockdown. And we have seen some really quite encouraging signs of uptake in relation to that. So where we can, we try and monitor. 21 was all around providing advice around online dating apps and social media dating, which can obviously come with some obvious dangers. That's a bit more harder to realise the impact. But yes, we do try and monitor the campaigns where we can with data.
I mean, the media team do build that into every campaign, the evaluation. But when certainly the dating app one arose out was identifying that we've seen a number of serious sexual offences which had occurred when people had met on dating apps. So the business threat was identified, it was translated into the activity. And the media team will look at certain things such as reach, who's looking at it, where it is. So you can judge the effectiveness of getting the message out there. It's really difficult to identify the potential going on something or to make them more cautious, which prevents a serious offence having taken place. So it's really difficult to actually understand that, but we know it's reaching, we know it gets to the right places, so you hope that that's going to have an effect. But actually, because it's so individual, it is difficult to know the potential impacts of it.
Do they ever fail?
Sorry?
Do you ever have a campaign that doesn't work?
Could just add some evaluation to this. Sorry. Also on the dating app, specifically on that campaign, the focus was very much on the people that are using apps such as Tinder, for example, And they would match with somebody, and this would be based on what they were reading of that person's profile. So they've not got a lot more to go on than that. Ordinarily, our advice would be to meet them in a public space so that adds a degree of safety. Unfortunately, with lockdown, that's less possible for them to achieve. So our focus here was to really give people advice around safety, and we wanted it to be targeted. So we can see on social media that 130,000 people engaged with this campaign to some degree. Around 200 people had it specifically shared with them. So that's where someone will go onto Facebook and they will type in that person's name to say, this is something you are interested in. Now, what that tells us is that those people are very likely to be involved in something like Tinder because their friend thought they were relevant to see this. So that's a really good metric for us. What we also know is on Tinder, so the campaign focused on setting up false campaigns on Tinder, profiles on Tinder. So it may present as Carrie Goodwin, lives in this area, interested in walks in the park. Someone could go on there and they could say, actually, that appeals to me, I like that person. And then you get a match or the first step of a match. Those people are showing that they are local to South Yorkshire and they like certain things. And what that allowed us to do is it allowed us to directly contact that person and explain that you can't actually get a lot of information from someone's profile and it can't always be trusted. And here are some tips and advice around how you can date people safely. So this was very much about empowering people who are dating through this route to do that in a safe way. It's, as the deputy has said, it's difficult to know what did it stop. We don't know what offences it stopped. We haven't had any offences reported using that MO since, but I don't think you could. I think it would be a huge leap to make it that direct link. But we do know that we are talking to people that are mixing in this space that are at more risk, and we're giving them very specific and direct advice. And so I think that's where we can show that our campaign objectives are specifically achieved, and we're just looking at some of the recommendations that come from that campaign so that we can relaunch it for Valentine's Day.
Ah, Valentine's Day, yes. Thank you, Kerry, for that. I was just curious, and I suppose I was wondering whether there'd ever been any perverse consequences of campaigns that were run, but perhaps that's for another day rather than this report. Thank you. I'm on to now 39 now, page 39, and at the top there, 3.25, the vulnerability assessment tool. This seemed to me really good, the work was done here, but I just wondered what happened to these young people, children who are identified as a result of the vulnerability assessment tool. What becomes of them then? Are there waiting lists for what may happen next, or how does that work? How is it working?
The vulnerability assessment tool provides an assessment for any child with recognised indicators of child criminal exploitation or child sexual exploitation, or even linked to county lines involving drugs and vulnerability. And this has been implemented in partnership with social care. So it's very much a joint management process. Now, this tool scores children and vulnerable adults who are being exploited, and it creates a single vulnerable assessment in which the partnership can use to then inform safeguarding responses and better understand the strategic picture of child exploitation within the local authority where the child resides. What I can say is that those assessments are, I use the expression, RAG rated, so according to the risk, red, amber and green, similar to that. And these are discussed at the district maze meetings, where sort of safeguarding plans are put in place to manage the risk appropriately.
But are there interventions available then for these young people?
Yes, I mean, working very closely with social care, there's regular interventions that we use to support children, early intervention processes that we use with our colleagues in various agencies.
Okay, thank you. Page 41, if I can take you there, this is towards the bottom, 3.42. This dedicated serious and organised crime vulnerability team. I just wondered if you could say something about that. How wide is the remit of the team, and how big is the team, and so on?
The force has a dedicated serious and organised crime vulnerability team, and the remit is to take ownership and manage serious, organised, complex modern slavery, human trafficking and investigations. The introduction has allowed the force to be more effective in managing OCGs involved in targeting vulnerable individuals across all aspects of modern slavery.
It's one of these, Commissioner, to appreciate it's often hidden harm that is really difficult to identify as. So the team works as that central point to increase awareness, acts as a point of contact for officers if they identify things, to put them in touch with other agencies or departments. And I think we are seeing encouraging signs in terms of the identification of that type of offence, and then we're in a much better place to try and deal with it as and when we do find them. I think it's an ongoing piece of work. I think it's making sure that the major crime teams, as well as the districts, have full visibility on it. So we're in there, we're making progress, and I think it's just something that we're going to have a concerted effort over a number of years to make sure that the reach gets to where it needs to get to.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm on page 43 now, 3.51. HMIC FRS requires all forces across the country to increase their use of ancillary orders. I've not heard of an ancillary order before. I would just explain that, Dan.
It's going to be there's a whole range of orders, Alan, in terms of different things, in terms of the varied powers that are available to us.
Oh, so it's lots of different orders.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that the legal services team here do provide us an outstanding service. I think in terms of the proactivity, we've already mentioned the DVPOs. We're currently pushing some gang injunctions. We've talked about the sexual harm prevention orders. I think we really do benefit as a force from an extremely proactive and very able legal services team who I think more than most have seen really give great operational support to the frontline officers, and I think a testament to that is our legal services team have been right at the front of trying to translate government advice and regulations around COVID and provide the national guidance. We work with the Met Police, and I think South Yorkshire probably more than any other in conjunction with the Met have tried to translate sometimes occasionally foggy guidance that's come out and make it into a workable format for our frontline people.
The only thing that's been touched on by now is as a force, we're really well placed to manage the mental health and crisis demand. We're one of the only forces in the country to sit on the integrated care system, the ICS partnership, which is really influential for us because it's our direct access to commissioners of mental health trusts, and that has led to some really golden opportunities, really. An example of that is the ICS have agreed to fund a suicide prevention officer, which is proving really beneficial because what that allows us to do is once we've got suspected suicide or a suicide, a really tragic event, it allows us to do some really quick time interventions with the family and friends because, as we can probably imagine, if someone's been exposed to suicide, it can often trigger a suicide tendency in a family member or a friend, and it allows us the greatest opportunity to prevent that. So that's just to illustrate some of the benefits through the work that we're doing with the integrated care system. And I suppose the only other thing to mention is it's a watching brief really in relation to mental health demand and the impact. It's really beneficial, which has allowed us to manage the mental health demands. We are keeping it under close monitoring. Depending on what's going to happen after the period of lockdown ends, we may be expecting to see some increases in demand around mental health. But that's all I want to say, Commissioner. Thank you.
Mental health issues would be astonishing if there weren't implications following all these restrictions and whatnot. Just going back to the suicide thing, where does South Yorkshire fit in terms of what's happening elsewhere in the country? Are we do we have a lot of suicides or potential suicides in South Yorkshire? Do you know the answer to that, Dan?
I do. If you bear with me, I'll just get to the report. So there have been 174 suspected suicides recorded in 2020, which is around a 5-6% increase when you're looking at volumes in 2019. So unfortunately, it's a fairly bleak figure that we experience an average of 14 suicides a month in South Yorkshire, which again evidences the need for us to be really well linked up with our partners through the ICS. How that compares with other forces or areas around the country, I'm not so sure. Maybe that's something I can get back to you with, Commissioner. But what I can say is that, which is why it's really crucial for us to link in with our partners in health, social care, and often third-party organisations to support families.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people looking at it, that gives us the opportunity. One of the big advantages for getting the information to try and understand where the trends are going, what the issues are. Once we've identified the issues, we can then look at preventative measures. So is it about repeat people who need bespoke attention? Is it about particular locations that present a risk where perhaps we can engage with partners to try and target harden them to try and prevent them being an easy access point at a person's time of crisis? But I think we're evolving our picture. I'm not sure across the country everywhere has developed in terms of having people to look at it. So it's difficult to get a national picture because the evidence and intelligence isn't really there that every force collates it. So nationally it's difficult to judge, but as Dan says, clearly it is a cause of concern that we've got that many people in crisis.
Yes, I'd be interested to know and to see whether suicides and potential suicides follow the same pattern of inequality that you see in other aspects of the social life of communities. So, yeah, anything back on that, Dan, I'd be very interested in. Thank you very much. So, shall we move then to item 13, SYP's quarterly budget monitoring overview. Debbie, I think you're on the line. This is pages 57 to 64. I don't think there's a lot to say that we don't know, but Debbie, do you want to say something about this report?
Yes, morning everyone. Projected year-end outturn, based on our best estimates at the end of December, is a small underspend of £340,000. After taking account of the planned and approved contribution to the insurance reserve, we pretty much have a balanced position. It's a really small overspend of 30,000. And then just to touch upon the key points that are on page 58, these, as you say, these are really along the same lines as what we've previously reported. Just to mention, with COVID, we continue to capture those costs and report to the Home Office on a monthly basis. We're now projecting further income to the end of the year in relation to the income loss recovery scheme, which we weren't at the previous meeting. The police pensions, at the time of writing the report, we were awaiting the outcome of the McLeod remedy consultation. That came through last week, and we need to work through the finer details of that, but we are still assuming that the government will fund any additional costs as a result of this, which is a reasonable assumption, but it is nevertheless still a risk for us. And the last point really on the key points is the Police Uplift Programme. We are now projecting the full amount of the ring-fenced funding in full. And if you recall, this ring-fenced element is the part of the Police Uplift Programme that has conditions attached, and we didn't include this as part of the budget setting. We prudently excluded it because we were uncertain around those conditions, and we didn't meet the uplift target last year, but we are confident that we are going to meet the target in the current year. So we're now projecting the full amount there. This funding really has helped us to meet the increased cost of police officers in the current year. As I previously reported, we were overstrength at the start of the year. We've increased recruitment and we've brought forward recruitment cohorts. We have a reducing number of leavers, which may be COVID related. and we have an increased number of rejoiners and 30 plus officers. So this additional funding is helping us to meet those costs and some capital related expenditure in relation to uplift. And there isn't really any change in terms of the growth or the procurement. So that really covers the revenue side. Do you have any questions? And then I'll just say a little bit on the capital.
Well, on the revenue side, the only thing that I had a question about was probably not one that's directed to yourself, but on page 59, police officers paying overtime. A big increase in overtime, 2.26 million, and which will be of interest to some of the leaders that I meet from time to time who go on about police overtime. But I guess all this is coronavirus related. But I just wonder what the impact all this is having on officer welfare and well-being. Increased amounts of overtime. Perhaps this is one for the chief or Mark.
Certainly, I think one of the things we'd say is, our workforce have been at work. The frontline officers who attract overtime throughout the COVID crisis, they've not had the option to work from home. You've had to pick up slack from, at times, other agencies who haven't been able to maintain resilience. And I think it is exceptional times. I think if you ask the officers, did they want the overtime at the minute, they'd probably say no. They'd probably appreciate some decent time off. So I think we're conscious more from the welfare side than we are the budgetary side at the moment in terms of that overspend. But at times of national crisis, you tend to see the overspend time spent go up, so we've just got to fill the void for other things. David, you are gold COVID, anything further on that spend?
Yeah, Commissioner, this really is just making sure we maintain that full service delivery. We have a COVID coordination which distributes that overtime, and this is very much around where we see potential gaps in service from outbreaks. And such, we've got the Kent variant that is now dominant within the county. And unfortunately, that is so contagious that really with policing, which is a contact service, we are at higher risk. So overtime has been used around backfilling core service, but also the enforcement around COVID, those restrictions. And then just very briefly is the Lead for Force Health and Wellbeing. We've put enormous efforts into both the psychological and the physical health of our staff. We recognise that this is going to be taking a mighty toll on our staff. That there aren't those usual release valves that are available for our staff out of work. So very much, the psychological, we're providing online support, team-based support. We've just gone with the SYP and Me magazine to try and broadcast that. And in terms of physical health, we continue to try and support staff with home training programs. We continue to maintain all of the force gyms under strict COVID compliance, but we keep those available for local staff to try and keep them as fit and healthy as we can. So enormous effort there, Commissioner.
Just on that again, Commissioner, if you can, because police overtime does often attract comment. So just in terms of some of the ways we've attracted overtime spend, as Dave has said, it's our people who are having to go and deal with those people who are breaching COVID conditions, so they're having to go to mass gatherings and deal with those selfish people who don't think the rules apply to them. So the enforcement team will certainly be attracting overtime to go and put themselves in harm's way to deal with that. And at the other extreme, it's our officers who worked on the excess death team to actually go around and deal with those people who obviously suffered a bereavement and a fatality, and actually work with partners to manage the recovery of people who died as a result of it. So I think, when people are thinking about the police overtime spend, when you put it into context about what they're actually doing, incurring that overtime, I think we'd agree none of us would really volunteer for that if we had a choice. And it's a testament to our people that they're getting out there and doing it and looking after the communities in the middle of a crisis.
Yes, and I have to say, on the whole, the emails that I'm getting at the moment are all very supportive of what the police are having to do during this period of coronavirus. Not only, as you say, managing those incidents where people are gathering in large numbers, but also the recovery of those who've sadly died. I guess people have become more aware during this period of exactly what the full range of policing is in our communities. Thank you. Debbie, you wanted to say something about capital. Is this page 62?
Yes. Yep, that's right. Just briefly, the actual spend to the end of December is £6.3 million, which is around 45% of the budget. We are still projecting to spend the budget in full, but we are starting to identify some slippage. The biggest scheme being Robert Dyson House. COVID obviously hasn't helped matters into accommodation, so that has created slippage in that area. But back to my previous point, we are still projecting to spend the budget in full, but we know, I suppose, from past experience that we do tend to see slippage creeping in towards the end of the year. We did go through the schemes in detail at the last Strategic Resourcing Board. Jackie and I continue to stress the importance of progressing these schemes, and I'm working with our budget holders on that. So that's really the update on capital.
Thank you. Yeah, and I gather you are making that point to the teams, as you put it very strongly. But well, I've got bets riding on this, Deborah, so I'm not holding my breath. But yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment on that report? Everybody happy? Thank you. On to item 14, restorative justice, an update. Tim, this is you, 65 to 70. I think the only thing that I would want to say is that there does seem to be on the part of the public still a widespread misunderstanding of what restorative justice is, and the feeling on the part of a lot of people that somehow it's an alternative to criminal justice system. I just wonder if you could say a word around it about RJ.
Yeah.
Is it, Tim?
Well, no, it's not an alternative, and it can work alongside.
Is it you doing it? It is you doing the report. Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay.
We can.
Right. Fine. Okay. Good. So, restorative justice is not an alternative to conventional criminal justice routes, and can be used alongside that in certain circumstances. As I said, in its overall context, certainly over the last 4 years, we've tried to move South Yorkshire Police to be far more proactive, as evidenced by our investments in neighbourhood policing, to get upstream of crime and antisocial behaviour in communities by undertaking effective problem solving, and to play our part with partners in early intervention to identify people who are at risk of falling into repeat offending and at risk of having greater impact by their activities on the local community. What restorative justice is an integral part of that, and it allows victims and offenders to be brought together to undertake some form of explanation and reparation. So, in terms of low-level offending, where you've got first-time offenders, often, there's lots of academic evidence behind this. Bringing the offender and the victim together, undertaking some form of reparation, which could be an apology, could be repairing damage, or something like providing an element of financial recompense, often is far more powerful in terms of changing the behaviour of that particular offender, and often far more powerful in terms of giving a sense of satisfaction to the victim. So it has a utility in dealing with first-time offenders in terms of providing a proper reparation to the victim and changing the behaviour of that often young person. What we don't want to do, and I think none of us want that, is to unnecessarily criminalise young people who may have made a mistake. However, where that's not possible, and it might not be possible because the victim doesn't want it, it might not be possible because the offender just simply doesn't admit that behaviour or displays an attitude that's completely at odds with the restorative justice approach, then absolutely there is always an option, and we do pursue people through the criminal justice route, and may well have been sentenced to a prison sentence. in some circumstances there, we work with specialists who can, again, with the consent of the victim, and it has to be something that's wanted by both parties, bring victim and offender together, either in person, but sometimes by correspondence, to allow an explanation of what sits behind the offending, an apology. All that is geared to do is to provide a sense of, I suppose, empowerment to the victim in terms of confronting the offender in controlled circumstances, but also an opportunity for the offender to actually realise the impact of their offending on the victim. And all that is aimed at preventing reoffending in the future once the criminal justice sentence is finished. And again, that links in very much with our approach to problem solving, preventing reoffending, and fits squarely in line with police and crime plan in terms of tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, and in this particular case from repeat offenders.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you on page 67, this is 3.14, community justice panels, how you think they are work or have been working during this lockdown period? You say that there's a good pool of volunteers and so on. I just wondered if you could just say a word around that, how they're operating at this moment in time.
I think there has been absolute challenges in terms of bringing panels together during lockdown, and because of the need around social distancing. They are now in place across the district, but their impact certainly during the COVID period has been limited. But as we move out of lockdown, we'll certainly look to invigorate those with our partners as we move forward.
And who are the sort of people who oversee the panels operation? Who is it that does that?
So we have an appointed coordinator in each district, but often they're just made up of volunteers in the community. And this links in with something I'm very keen to do. It's about community capacity building. It's about people who have the communication skills to be able to mediate in disputes and bring people together as a local community member and actually seek some resolution. Because often the issues that go before community justice panels, such as neighbour disputes, minor criminal damage, youth behaving badly, these are issues that can be solved by parties being brought together and speaking and actually understanding the impact of each other's behaviour and coming up with some form of reparation. And often it's people in the community who actually have a stake in that community and as residents. It can be quite powerful, and more powerful sometimes than the statutory agencies trying to deal with it in terms of seeking a resolution.
And this is essentially a local authority-led thing, is it, the community panels, or is it a police-led?
The local authorities are a key stakeholder in it as well, but we have our coordinators pulling that together.
So it's police coordinated. And this, I said you had a good pool, but do you have a good pool? Do you need more volunteers? Or
I'd have to get back to you with the exact numbers. I'll clarify that with Steve Chapman. My understanding is that we do have a reasonable pool, but again, the broader issue of neighbourhood policing in communities and our involvement in communities, we're always looking for members of the community to work with us in terms of improving community safety. So it could be as a member of a panel, it could be running a neighbourhood watch, it could be people who are running different youth groups and voluntary organisations in the community. We're always interested in talking to the community and working with the community to improve community safety at a local level.
Yeah, it's just that when I'm doing my virtual meetings these days with community groups, I often come across people who say they want to do something for the police. I've never mentioned community panels, justice panels before, so it might be something I can add to the list then. So thank you very much. I think that's everything I wanted to say about that, Tim, unless there's anything else you've got.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was item 14.15, update on Atlas Court. David, we partly touched on some of this, I think, but pages 71 and 72.
Yeah, Commissioner, this is really good news. Just to explain what this is really, we've got the very familiar and conventional ways of communicating with South Yorkshire Police was very much either 39s or 101, and we know that the real frustrations that our communities suffered with just having those lines of communication. Of course, with our neighbourhood change, we then open that up to where you can reference your and you can get their mobile numbers and emails directly to facilitate that linkage at neighbourhoods. This really is the next step of significant improvement in how our communities can link and contact us. So, what is the digital portal? This is really just an online contact by an increase of 16 staff who are working on what's called the digital desk to extend the channels of how you can communicate with South Yorkshire Police. So this is 50 online reporting forms. So pretty much all crime categories, other than domestic abuse, because we have some concerns around really the safeguarding of a compromise while trying to do that. But we do have already a domestic abuse online reporting, so we do have that in a different form. But outside of that vulnerability, pretty much every crime category you can now follow online reporting. This is supported by an extensive knowledge bank, and that will lead those who register for this service through advice and guidance, and really is a self-serve rather than having to wait to talk conventionally in a conversation. Our community can look at that, gain the information that they need to know, take an online option if they wish, and as an alternative to 101 can have a web chat. And this is familiar in other commercial lines where your crime or an incident and a response very much at our community's convenience. So this opens up really a wealth of online forms, web chat which provides that online support and really does take us forward in terms of how we can manage incoming demand, so we're not single routing to 101 and the delays. So the improvement here is that really since November we soft launched this to make sure we tested out all of the systems. It's working very, very well. Somebody who wants to use this simply has to register, provide some details. And let me at this point just give some reassurance, because since November in trialling that, there's been concerns around, well, if I register and provide some details of my email, what are South Yorkshire Police going to do with that? Other than this core service of providing support and help for what that member of the public wants to try and progress, either a crime report or an incident report. We've had questions like, can the police turn on my laptop camera remotely after I've registered? The answer is no. We have no interest in doing anything else other than supporting the person with what it is they want to try and gain information or record an incident or get some form of response from us. So it really is good news. That you will see in the report there are future functionalities there. The callback request, this is where you'll be able to do that online. That's about to go live. I would highlight you can already do that with 101. When you phone in and you listen to the explanation of what happens with 101, there is an option then that you can adopt an option which is a callback. We're going to have that in the digital space as well. That's just about to go live. The link to the emails and text, that's just routing into what we already offer in our neighbourhood footprints of saying, look, here's the direct details of all our officers to help get in touch. And the chatbot is an automated version to expand and enhance the web chat. The moment the web chat is a live communication with our 16 dedicated staff, the chatbot is an automated to help somebody with that knowledge base that will help take them through different steps so they can gather information. So it really is good news. We're going forward with this. It's worked very well so far, and we've gone within the last week high profile making this available to our community in terms of external communication. So we expect, we've had around 4,000 registrations in use since November. I anticipate that's going to explode now and become potentially a reporting route of choice.
4,000 since November, and it was, as you say, a soft launch, so that's quite extraordinary, really.
It is, and really good for us in that it tested it, and we've just seen no issues with this, where you would normally anticipate snags, and some issues with new technology. It's been very smooth so far, so I am touching wood at the moment as we go for the bigger use. Fingers crossed it remains resilient.
The idea that you could turn on people's cameras when you can't even turn on your own was extraordinary, I thought. But and I think I've done something on that. I do a blog every week on a Tuesday. I think if Fiona's out of bed and on the line, have we put that up today? Doesn't that include reference to this, Fiona?
It'll be going up at lunchtime, Alan, and it's been sent out now.
Okay, so we're doing our bit, David, to try and, so you'd be 4,002 after lunchtime, I look things. No,
I've
that's
just
really,
tweeted out about it as well, so it's gone out.
I mean, I guess for a digitally aware generation who use mobile phones all the time, they don't want 101, I guess. Is that like...
No, I mean, the good news around that is that even outside of this improvement, 101 is enormously improved. You know, we were well aware of the frustrations that having to wait half an hour sometimes to get through on 101, 18 months or so ago, was deeply frustrating. That's improved now. You look at an average wait time of just over 5 minutes for 101. 3 nines is pretty much instantaneous. I think this is going to improve it even further because those who would be in that 101 queue now will be able to satisfy all their needs in a manner that they will prefer, which is online. So I think that this is a key step forward for us.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned at this meeting before that the number of calls we get or emails we get about 101, the service, the wait times, has gone to a mere trickle now, so that's a really good sign, I think. So.
Good news.
Good, thank you very much. That is good to have some good news. That was item 15. We're into the final part of the agenda, Chief Executive reporting item 16. Michelle, this is 73 to 80, Strategic and Financial Planning.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, there's two parts to this. There's been a twin track of the planning process in Yorkshire. If I can just take the budget first. I won't repeat what's already in the report and has been in previous reports in relation to the process. Suffice it to say that on the 25th of January, you took your budget and precept proposal to the South Yorkshire Leaders Meeting, the 4 leaders of our 4 district authorities, as part of your consultation process, the final stage. You explained that you intended to uplift council tax for council taxpayers in South Yorkshire because to not maximise the flexibility given to you by the government in relation to council tax uplift would mean that various things were unaffordable in relation to South Yorkshire Police's spending for the forthcoming year, the uplift of police officer numbers and the growth to support the infrastructure. So there was some pushback in relation to the leaders' meeting, which you took into consideration at your planning group with Force colleagues on the 27th of January. You then took your final proposal on council tax precepts to the Police and Crime Panel as part of the legislative process on the 3rd of February. They, by unanimous vote, supported your proposal to uplift council tax because of the consequences if you didn't do so in relation to the budget. That now goes to your Public Accountability Board special meeting on the 24th of February when you finally confirm the precept and the budget to be set for South Yorkshire's policing and crime spend for next year. On the other side of the house, the review of the police and crime plan, we've explained before that because of the deferment of the PCC elections, you wanted to release an addendum to the police and crime plan to take you beyond the PCC elections, which are to take place this May. So it's Appendix A, Commissioner, is the final draft after consultation with Force colleagues, and on page 78 of the pack, in that addendum, members will be able to see that the focus of concerns that you've picked up from the communities and partners, etc., and from the work of your office is listed there. Just quickly through the list, the focus of concerns that will take you to beyond the elections are neighbourhood crimes, domestic abuse, organised crime gangs and serious violence, speeding and road safety, rural crime, cyber crime, issues of disproportionality and inclusivity, the operating model of SYP, including visibility in communities and matching resources to demand, understanding what is working, and finally partnership working, including with criminal justice agencies. There's other aspects of the addendum that explains the support that you're giving to SYP in its journey outstanding since 2016, and then there's a part about the uplift programme in terms of increased police officer numbers. That addendum will now be published, Commissioner, if you accept it. Okay. and I know that Fiona is on with the design and print to get that published on the website. That's it for today, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody want to comment on any of that? Anyone from the force? Everybody happy? Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. That was nicely put, gently put, I thought, the bit about the precept. So item 17 then is PCC decisions. I think Erica sent apology, didn't she? So this is page 81, 82. Is this you, Michelle, as well?
Yes, Commissioner, it's just the update on the decisions that you've made since the last PAB. I don't want to comment unless there's any questions. Those decisions are also reported to the Police and Crime Panel.
Anybody commenting or questioning? Thank you very much. And PAB work programme item 80, the final item, 83 and 80 to 86, Michelle.
Commissioner, that's always included in the pack so that we can have a forward look at what's on the agenda for next time. Just to draw attention to an update from the head of the Violence Reduction Unit on achievements so far. We'll be joined by the new head of the VRU as well, is the plan, so that there's a sort of a handover in March as Graham Jones starts as the new head of the VRU on the 1st of March.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think that's everything because there's no any other business that was notified at the beginning of the meeting, so I think we've done everything. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance and the contributions that people made.